Okay, hi there guys. We are talking 1950s culture today. So we're gonna see all kinds of things that are probably familiar to you being Americans. And the 50s can either be kind of summed up in the idea that it's very conservative and complacent and contented, or is it really the idea that it is filled with anxiety and alienation and social unrest. Those are the things I'm going to ask us to talk about here in class. Okay, so our first big part of the 1950s culture change is really the impact of the baby boom. So, a British visitor basically says that it seems like everybody's pregnant in 1958. And that is not far from the truth. As you see here, in the 30s and the Depression and during the war era and into the conflict, the birth rate remains a little below or at the 20 mark right here. But we see a quick change here in the after-war years in 46 and 50, and that rate stays high by a average of more like 25 here for an extended period of time, and only gets back to what was previously the rate in the late 60s and 70s. So odds are if your parents are a little older, if they were born in the early to mid 60s, they are a baby boomer. My parents definitely here in this range in the early 50s, they are baby boomers. So, believe it or not, but in 1957, one baby was born every 7 seconds in our country. That is a lot of babies. Along with babies, the idea of babies changed as well. A guy named Dr. Benjamin Spock came up with this idea of baby and child raising. He wrote a book about it in which he encouraged parents to be more kind of relational with their kids, as well as show them love and treat them as individuals. And this was a change in parenting style from previous generations. And here he is visiting with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 babies. This person has quintuplets, so man oh man. And we can see that along with most other things, school changes here. The rate of the millions that need to be educated, K to 8, grows significantly in the 60s and the 70s. This is a huge impact. Lots of schools, a lot more teachers are needed for this change in population growth. Another thing is suburban living. So if you're taking notes, I would write this down. And the idea of the American dream forms here in the 50s, the idea that everyone can own their own home. And with a lot of GIs coming back from the war and the GI Bill, this guy, William Levitt, comes up with the idea of prefabricated homes, that he was going to build 150 homes per week. And what that looks like is this. You might know this as suburbia, so that it's a planned out structure with homes that look similar or identical, and you could buy a house for less than $8,000 in the late 40s and for a $60 per month payment with no down payment. So this is a steal. People start to move to the suburbs in droves because of low prices and the need for more housing for all these babies. So suburban living has, this is what it looks like, these Levitt homes, that everyone was going to have a one-story house with a large living room, 2 bedrooms for the parents and the kids, tiled bathroom, a garage, a small backyard, and a front lawn, and about a third of the people live in suburbs by 1960. So this is a huge number, and this has some significant changes. So we can see people are going to be staying about the same in the central city, major cities in the United States. The suburbs are going to raise significantly, and rural areas, people are going to stop living in small towns and rural areas and start moving to the country. So says the U.S. Bureau of Census. And this is really going to be middle class typically white Americans. So there's going to be kind of a de facto segregation and some really big consequences for cities in particular. This has to do with politics, schooling, all kinds of different reasons, and really going to create a divided America more than it previously was. So this has some pretty big consequences. Moving on. Also, that it gets published in TV, that suburban living seemed normal because people were going to watch it on the good old television. Check this guy out. Looks more like a radio to me, but the Donna and Reed show, Leave It to Beaver. You've probably heard at least a couple of these shows. Father Knows Best, and Ozzie and Harriet show, all highlighted the idea of suburban living. That this was normal and typical. The mom, dad, and 2 kids idea. So this popularizing this new trend in American society in the 50s. Moving on, another idea would be consumerism. And this is the idea that people should buy a bunch of stuff, that this is going to be the engine for the economy. We can see after the war, the consumer credit only goes up and up and up into the 1960s. This would be significantly higher if it were today, this chart. So we can see people owing a lot of money by buying new things like vacuum cleaners and toasters and washers and dryers. And really, the idea further along was all these new people, these babies, we're going to see as potential consumers for brand new markets for food, clothing, and shelter. So Life magazine gets the idea that there's going to be a lot of consumers in America, and that really we want to get on the bottom or the start of these people's lives, get them familiar with brands like Kellogg, cereal, or TV shows, like ABC News, so that you have these people for their entire life. Moving on, so certain brands, radios, Tupperware, black and white TVs, clothes, all of this is consumerism at its American's finest. And the way we work changed in the 50s as well. So automation is the idea when robots take over what American workers previously had done. And so actually there's a loss of blue-collar jobs, 4.3% from the late 40s to the 50s, and instead more white-collar jobs than blue-collar jobs for the first time in the 60s. And the idea of computers being used in the workforce, the Mark I mainframe computer, which is huge and really strange for us today, but nevertheless begins to be used by corporations. And the idea that big companies are going to form in the 50s, that 600 corporations in our country own half of the wealth. They own 53% of the corporate income. And this is really because of a military buildup, that the government was choosing companies to create all kinds of military goods, and those companies really were the big economic winners. Moving on, there is going to be a new corporate culture, people called company men, that represent kind of driven men focused on their careers, kind of seen as robotic. A book and a movie by the title The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit popularized this idea of the man going to the office with the suit and the tie, kind of losing his soul to gain kind of economic prosperity. Moving on, cars definitely changed America. In 45, there were 25 million cars, but by 1960, there were 60 million cars. And the idea that a family was going to need a car. So some really classic cars here in the 50s. So we have Cadillacs and Corvettes, and the idea that highways, so I-75 runs through our neck of the woods, that the Interstate Highway Act, so a network of highways connecting the country, costs $32 billion and added thousands of miles of new highway. This connects the country in ways that it previously never was. And the culture of the car really becomes homogenous, that we expect cars and things like McDonald's show up for the first time, and drive-thrus, and drive-ins to watch the movies all in your car. The car becomes an American item. Moving on, the U.S. population moves. Cars allow you to be more mobile, and so the Sun Belt, states in the South and the Southwest, and California really begin to boom as far as a population because people move there because of things like air conditioning. So Disneyland highlights the good old days in the Frontierland and kind of contemporary times, and then Future Town, the idea of the monorail and a utopian society coming up here in the future near us, but didn't really happen. Television really transforms the way society communicates with its population. We can see 7,000 TVs in the United States in '46 and 50 million by 1950. This is a huge change. Some people are not a huge fan of television. It's a wasteland, apparently, this guy. But nevertheless, it really celebrates traditional American values. Alright, so good old Superman, truth, justice, and the American way. I don't know if you heard that, but, you know, the intro, it's a bird, it's a plane, no, it's Superman. So these kind of American ideas. Oh, yeah. Alright, so the idea that Westerns were huge, this idea of kind of reliving or memorializing the American past, but probably pretty fictionalized with Davy Crockett and the Lone Ranger and Gunsmoke. All these kind of highlight the idea of good and bad guys, of cowboys and Indians, this conflict, the popularization of violence, and it being used for good means. So all this kind of communicates underlying ideas kind of associated with the Cold War. Moving on, we can see family shows show up. Alright, so I Love Lucy kind of characterizes middle-class suburban life. And there's also a second half, though, and the honeymooners represent kind of the social losers, where I Love Lucy represents maybe the winners in society. So both of these families are very different. One's prosperous, one's kind of backwards and not as economically prosperous. Alright, here's a little Elvis for you. Alright. See you later, Elvis. Alright, in the 50s, the word teenager actually enters the American language, meaning the word didn't exist before then because people didn't really view people in their teens as significant. But by 1956, because there's 13 million teens and they're spending lots of money, they're seen as a pretty important kind of cultural group. And they're embracing of what was once called race music in reference to African Americans and their contribution to early rock and roll music with blues and jazz. Later is coined rock and roll, and Elvis categorizes that to a T. Moving on with teen culture, there was this idea of juvenile delinquencies. J.D. Salinger writes The Catcher in the Rye. These two studs, Marlon Brando and James Dean, represent kind of this teenage angst, that rebel without a cause, that teenagers are just out to cause trouble. Moving on, the Beat Generation. So all of these guys are active members of the Beat Generation, and Beatnik was kind of the phrase of the idea, and it was one was kind of a dirty kid, and the other was called clean. So I will finish up the second part.